Section 590.6 of the National Electrical Code requires that all 125-volt single-phase, 15, 20, and 30 ampere receptacle outlets that are not part of the permanent wiring of the building or structure and are in use by personnel must have ground fault circuit interrupter protection for personnel. It specifically does not permit receptacles on lighting circuits. The commentary for Section 215.9 in the NEC handbook states that ground fault circuit interrupter protection in the feeder can also be used to protect construction site receptacles as covered in 590.6a, provided the feeder supplies no lighting branch circuits. Section 525.23c does not permit egress lighting to be protected by a ground fault circuit interrupter. Section 620.24 requires that hoistway pit lighting shall not be connected to the load side of a ground fault circuit interrupter. Considering these sections, let's address whether temporary lighting circuits are required or permitted to be protected by a ground fault circuit interrupter. Firstly, it's crucial to differentiate between receptacle outlets and lighting circuits. Section 590.6 primarily addresses receptacle outlets used by personnel on construction sites and similar temporary installations. These receptacles must be ground fault circuit interrupter protected. The exception mentioned in the commentary for 215.9 allows for ground fault circuit interrupter protection at the feeder level for these receptacles, but only if the feeder does not supply any lighting branch circuits. This distinction is vital. Now let's consider the lighting circuits themselves. The code does not explicitly require ground fault circuit interrupter protection for all temporary lighting circuits. However, the permissibility of ground fault circuit interrupter protection depends on the specific application and the type of lighting. Secondly, sections 525.23c and 620.24 provide specific restrictions. Section 525.23c prohibits ground fault circuit interrupter protection for egress lighting, while 620.24 prohibits it for hoistway pit lighting. The reasoning behind these restrictions is that the unintentional tripping of a ground fault circuit interrupter on these critical lighting circuits could create a safety hazard. For egress lighting, a sudden loss of illumination during an emergency evacuation could lead to injuries or panic. Similarly, in a hoistway pit, the sudden loss of lighting could endanger personnel working in the area. Thirdly, for other types of temporary lighting, such as general area lighting on a construction site, the code does not explicitly prohibit ground fault circuit interrupter protection. In these cases, the decision to use ground fault circuit interrupter protection often depends on a risk assessment and the specific conditions of the site. If there is a high risk of ground faults, such as in wet or damp locations, or where equipment with damaged insulation is likely to be used, then ground fault circuit interrupter protection may be a prudent safety measure. In summary, the requirement for ground fault circuit interrupter protection on temporary lighting circuits depends on several factors. Firstly, the type of circuit and its intended use. Secondly, specific prohibitions in the code for certain types of lighting like egress and hoistway pit lighting, and thirdly, a risk assessment of the site conditions. While the code mandates ground fault circuit interrupter protection for receptacle outlets used by personnel, it does not universally require it for all temporary lighting circuits. However, ground fault circuit interrupter protection is permitted and may be advisable in many situations, provided it does not violate any specific prohibitions and does not create a greater safety hazard. Furthermore, it's important to understand the nuances of the NEC to ensure compliance and safety. The NEC is not a design manual, but a set of minimum safety standards. It is up to the qualified electrical professional to assess the specific conditions of each installation and determine the most appropriate safety measures. Remember to always consult the latest edition of the NEC and any applicable local codes and regulations. The NEC undergoes regular revisions to reflect changes in technology and safety practices. Relying on outdated information can lead to non-compliance and potentially dangerous situations. Moreover, consider the practical implications of using ground fault circuit interrupter protection on temporary lighting circuits. Ground fault circuit interrupters are designed to trip when they detect a ground fault, which is an unintended path for current to flow to ground. This can be caused by damaged insulation, faulty equipment, or wet conditions. While this tripping is intended to protect personnel from electric shock, it can also be a nuisance if it occurs frequently due to minor or transient ground faults. In some cases, these nuisance trips can disrupt work and create delays. Therefore, it's important to carefully consider the potential for nuisance trips when deciding whether to use ground fault circuit interrupter protection on temporary lighting circuits. One way to mitigate the risk of nuisance trips is to use high-quality equipment and to regularly inspect the wiring and equipment for damage. Another approach is to use ground fault circuit interrupters with adjustable trip settings. These allow you to set the level of ground fault current that will cause the ground fault circuit interrupter to trip. By increasing the trip setting, you can reduce the likelihood of nuisance trips caused by minor ground faults. However, it's important to note that increasing the trip setting also reduces the sensitivity of the ground fault circuit interrupter, which may compromise its ability to protect personnel from electric shock. Therefore, it's crucial to carefully consider the trade-offs when adjusting the trip settings on a ground fault circuit interrupter. In addition to the NEC requirements, it's also important to be aware of any applicable OSHA regulations. OSHA has specific requirements for electrical safety on construction sites and other workplaces. These regulations may require the use of ground fault circuit interrupter protection in certain situations, even if it is not explicitly required by the NEC. Therefore, it's essential to consult both the NEC and OSHA regulations to ensure compliance. Another important consideration is the type of ground fault circuit interrupter to use. There are two main types of ground fault circuit interrupters. Firstly, ground fault circuit interrupter receptacles, and secondly, ground fault circuit interrupter circuit breakers. Ground fault circuit interrupter receptacles are installed in place of standard receptacles and provide ground fault circuit interrupter protection only at that specific outlet. Ground fault circuit interrupter circuit breakers are installed in the electrical panel and provide ground fault circuit interrupter protection for the entire circuit. The choice between ground fault circuit interrupter receptacles and ground fault circuit interrupter circuit breakers depends on the specific application and the desired level of protection. Ground fault circuit interrupter receptacles are generally less expensive and easier to install, but they only provide protection at the specific outlet. Ground fault circuit interrupter circuit breakers provide protection for the entire circuit, but they are more expensive and require more extensive installation. In many cases, a combination of ground fault circuit interrupter receptacles and ground fault circuit interrupter circuit breakers is used to provide comprehensive ground fault circuit interrupter protection. For example, ground fault circuit interrupter receptacles may be used at individual outlets where personnel are likely to be using electrical equipment, while ground fault circuit interrupter circuit breakers may be used to protect entire circuits that supply multiple outlets. Finally, it's important to remember that ground fault circuit interrupter protection is only one element of a comprehensive electrical safety program. Other important elements include regular inspections of wiring and equipment, proper grounding, and employee training. By implementing a comprehensive electrical safety program, you can significantly reduce the risk of electrical accidents and injuries. Furthermore, always ensure that any electrical work is performed by qualified and licensed electricians. Working with electricity can be dangerous, and it's essential to have the knowledge and skills necessary to perform the work safely. Unqualified individuals should never attempt to perform electrical work. In conclusion, the question of whether temporary lighting circuits are required or permitted to be protected by a ground fault circuit interrupter is complex and depends on a variety of factors. While the NEC mandates ground fault circuit interrupter protection for receptacle outlets used by personnel, it does not universally require it for all temporary lighting circuits. However, ground fault circuit interrupter protection is permitted and may be advisable in many situations, provided it does not violate any specific prohibitions and does not create a greater safety hazard. By carefully considering the NEC requirements, OSHA regulations, and the specific conditions of the site, you can make informed decisions about the use of ground fault circuit interrupter protection on temporary lighting circuits. Remember to always prioritize safety and to consult with qualified electrical professionals when necessary.